Welcome to this episode of Salvation and Catastrophe, the Greek-Turkish War 1919-1923. In this episode, covering the events from January to March 1920, we can see the rise of the nationalist movement to the position of representing the new Turkish nation through its control of the Ottoman Parliament, and then the decisive reaction of the great power allies to that rise through their essential occupation of the city of Istanbul, Constantinople. It is during this 3-month period where a lot is at stake, whether the center of nationalist resistance is going to be in Istanbul, Constantinople, or at Ankara, whether there are going to be two different centers of national resistance that will clash with each other, and which one of the two will have the upper hand. At the same time, the Greek army continues pushing forward its control area in Asia Minor, where the Greek Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos is mostly and more focused on the question of Thrace. So let's get on with it, and welcome to Salvation and Catastrophe. Welcome to the episode of Salvation and Catastrophe 1919-1923 that covers the events of January 1920, February 1920 and March 1920. I am Konstantinos Stavros, your host. I know everybody's going through a very difficult period now with the coronavirus pandemic. I am also quarantined, you are quarantined, so I decided to make an episode to give you something to do while you're locked in the house, but it is for our good. Stay safe and stay careful. So let's get on with the events, shall we? Between the 1st and 3rd of January of 1920, Archbishop Chrysanthos, as the representative of the Ottoman Greek Pontic communities living in the Trabzon-Trapezunda region, arrives for talks in Armenia. The topic is a potential federation. The talks fail. On 3rd January 1920, the Politburo decides to pursue territorial parties in the Transcaucasian republics, that is the Politburo of the Bolshevik Party of the Russian Socialist Federated Republics. On 6 January 1920, there is a crucial UK cabinet meeting in which the hard line of the Foreign Office against the Ottoman Empire is defeated by the more accommodationist line of the War Office and the India Office. You should go and watch my special episode about the various factions in the English government. There are debates about the future of the Eastern Question and the Ottoman Empire. In this debate, the position of the Foreign Office, which was to divest the Ottoman Empire of Istanbul, Constantinople, is defeated by the War Office and the India Office, which want to retain Constantinople, Istanbul, in the hands of the Ottoman sultans. On 8th January 1920, Colonel is met in Onu, without a job since the last cabinet reshuffling, leaves Istanbul, Constantinople from Ankara, where he joins Mustafa Kemal Atatürk there and starts planning resistance towards the Entente powers, and especially Armenia and Greece. On 9th January 1920, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk tells Colonel Fahrettin Altay, commander of the 12th Corps, which controls the area of Konya-Iconium, that he sees it necessary for him to take command of all Turkish forces in Western Anatolia and march against the Greeks in order to forestall an annexation of Izmir-Smyrna by the Greeks. A couple of days later, he and his men in Onu conduct a strategy meeting at Ankara. There is a suggestion that the nationalist movement pursue its goal through a guerrilla warfare. His men in Onu blocks the suggestion, arguing that guerrilla warfare is not enough in order to defeat the powerful Greek army, and that a war between the Turkish nationalist movement centered in Anatolia and the Greek state centered in Western Anatolia is inevitable, and that only a trained, well-armed, regular Turkish army could fight and defeat the regular Greek army. Thus, for İsmet İnönü, the task of the movement was to begin building on the available basis of the demobilized 50,000 strong men of the Ottoman army, a new regular army that will take the field. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk agrees with his Metinono, and the new nationalist government movement is going to focus on organizing a new regular army. On 10th January 1920, the Council of Foreign Ministers at Paris recognizes Georgia and Azerbaijan. This is a semi-de facto, semi-de jure recognition. It is an important event because until now, especially the French were unwilling to give any formal recognition to the Transcaucasian republics because they wanted to support General Denikin's white armies. But General Denikin has now been pretty much defeated. So with him out of the picture, it is much more easy for the Entente to pursue a policy of accommodation of the new republics. On 11 January 1920, Baha Said Bey and Kara Vasif of the Karakol Society in Istanbul, Constantinople tried to sign an agreement with the Soviets without permission of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. On 12 January 1920, the Ottoman Parliament convenes. It's 168 members. Out of its 168 members, only 72 are present on the opening day. They are dominated, all 168, by people affiliated with the various nationalist organizations and especially the Sivas movement led by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the Society for the Defense of the Rights of Rumelia and Anatolia. Now, this result, this electoral result, was helped greatly by the decision of Ottoman Greeks and Ottoman Armenians to boycott the elections as they did not consider themselves anymore as Ottoman citizens, and also of Damat Ferit Pasha and his liberal entente to also boycott the election because they were opposed to the participation of the Committee of Union and Progress. Thus, the supporters of Turkish and Muslim resistance to great power plans and Greek and Armenian expansion dominated the election and the parliament. They were now the voice of the Muslim majority of Anatolia. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk himself was elected as a member of parliament for Erzurum, but he decided to stay in Ankara as he believed that the parliament would not be able to operate freely under the shadow of the presence of the Entente forces in Istanbul, Constantinople. That said, many of his friends and collaborators decided to go to Istanbul, Constantinople to participate in the parliament. For example, Rauf Orbay. It is at this moment that slowly a new circle of friends or collaborators starts forming around Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, and this is going to play a very important role down the path in the history of the early republic. On 13th January 1920, 150,000 people meet at the Sultan Ahmed Square, where the Blue Mosque and the Hagia Sophia Mosque are located. Hagia Sophia was a mosque back then, to declare the determination to see Western Thrace, Eastern Thrace, and all of Anatolia become or remain part of the Ottoman Empire, and their opposition to the Greek presence in Izmir, Smyrna. There is a propaganda point in Greece that the nationalist movement in Anatolia did not really represent a mass of people. That most of the people did not care about what was going on or were loyal to the Sultan. That might be true to a point, but when it came to the educated elite, the mass of that Muslim educated elite was nationalist. Ali Kemal, Damat Ferit Pasha, they were exceptions. If you were an educated and you were a Muslim, you were a nationalist. You were a supporter of the Sivas Congress or the other nationalist organizations. And these were the majority of what we would call educated opinion. So it's not correct to say that Mustafa Kemal Atatürk was just another bandit leader, as a Greek propagandist said at that time and many still say today. He and the organization that he was leading were a powerful voice, representing a powerful part of the population. On 16th January 1920, the Allies de facto permit trade with the Bolsheviks, starting the long process of regularization of relationship between the Entente and the Bolshevik government in Russia. Between 17th January and 20th January 1920, Georges Clemenceau resigns as Prime Minister of France. He is trying to become President of the Republic, but he fails. He's replaced by Alexandre Milorand. Milorand is not as pro-Greek as Clemenceau was. He doesn't have the kind of personal relationship with Venizelos. The new president is Paul Deschanel, who replaces Raymond Poincaré, who was the combative president of the French Republic during the World War. On 19th January 1920, the Georgian and Azerbaijani delegations addressed the Paris Peace Conference. There is a decision to assist the Republic, but not to send military forces. So, hopes and prayers and lots of money, but nothing actually that can help them survive against the coming Soviet threat. The Supreme Council of the Paris Peace Conference also recognizes de facto, not de jure, the Armenian Republic. It also decides to permit the transfer of weapons and arms to the three Caucasian republics. But the UK War Office is opposed and dampened this initiative. As it's going to turn out, the Armenians are only going to receive weapons twice in the whole period. Once, a major arms shipment by Greece, which includes terrible Ross rifles, which the Armenians cannot use, and then a major arms shipment from Britain. Outside of these two foreign intervention assistances, all the military assistance that the Armenian Republic received was from the Nikir. On 20th January 1920, the Entente demands the removal of Ottoman War Minister Cemal Pasha Mersinli and Chief of the General Staff Cevat Çobanli Pasha, both of whom are considered too friendly to the nationalists. After a lot of discussion, the two resigned, despite Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's call on them not to do so, so there will be a rupture created with the great powers. At the same time, a skirmish is fought at Ahtemli between the Greek army and the Kuvayi Milliye, causing the Greek army 7 killed and 16 wounded, and the Greeks claiming to have caused 4 dead to the Kuvayi Milliye and 150 wounded. Between 21st January and 12 February 1920, starting thus on 21st January, the Battle of Marash begins, inaugurating the so-called Franco-Turkish War in Cilicia, also known as the Southern Front of the Turkish War of Liberation. The French are mainly fighting using Armenian auxiliaries and their colonial troops. I'm not going to go into depth into the battle, but it's worth reading a bit about it. By the end of the battle, the French evacuate the city together with 5,000 Armenians of the citizen population, but only 1,500 of those 5,000 Armenians reach Islahiye. The rest either die, are murdered, or are lost. 22nd January 1920, the Azeris, Georgians and Armenians meet at Tiflis, trying to resolve the issues between the three Caucasian republics and coordinating their resistance to the upcoming Soviet threat. This fails again. On 24th January 1920, we have the onset of the insurrection in the Muslim areas of Childer, Akhababa, Zarhushat, in the Kars region against the newly arrived Armenian rule. The night of 27th January 1920, nationalist guerrillas, starting from Istanbul, Constantinople, and traveling towards Cilicia in order to fight the French and the Armenians, sacked the military depot at Akbash on the Gallipoli-Çanakkale Peninsula. This was held by the French and gained weapons. On 28th January 1920, the US refuses to extend recognition to the Transcaucasian republics, a move that essentially weakens their international position. On 29th January 1920, there is a major Greek war council at the island of Chios with the presence of Lieutenant General Leonidas Paraskevopoulos, Commander-in-Chief of the Greek Army, Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos, High Commissioner Aristides Steriadis, Commander of the Asia Minor Field Army Lieutenant General Miliotis Komninos, and the commanders of the two corps of the army, Major General Konstantinos Naider and Major General Dimitrios Ioannou. It was decided to send another division from mainland Greece to the Field Army of Asia Minor, which will become the Kydonia Division under Colonel Alexandros Othoneos. Alexandros Othoneos is going to play a role later towards the end of the history of our story. And to also reinforce the Manisa-Magnesia front. On 31st January 1920, Mustafa Kemal fails to be elected as president, as speaker essentially of the Ottoman Parliament, further exacerbating the difference between the nationalists in Ankara, still around him, and those at Istanbul, Constantinople. The final 2/3 of January, the Greek 2nd Division occupies the passes around Gulchuk Lake, controlling the communications between Odemish and Salihli. Army Corps A did light operations for rationalizing its line, suffering 2 officers and 40 enlisted wounded. On 3rd February 1920, Churchill informs Denikin that the Allies will give no further assistance to his forces. This followed an internal cabinet victory by Lloyd George over Churchill. This is the official end of the support by the British to the White Armies in the Crimea, and this also explains the shift towards recognizing the Transcaucasian republics. Between 5th and 6th February 1920, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk notifies his military commanders that the Transcaucasian barrier between Turkey and the Russian Socialist Federated Soviet Republic must be destroyed, otherwise the nationalist movement will fail. This is a clear indicator that the first focus of the nationalist movement as it's built its military forces is towards the east. This also makes sense because the most ready forces available are Kazım Karabekir's elite 5th Corps. On 7th February 1920 and lasting until 11th April 1920, we have the onset of the Battle of Urfa, again as part of the Franco-Turkish War, South Front of the Turkish War of Liberation. On 9th February 1920, the Ottoman Parliament approves a new cabinet where Fevzi Çakmak serves as a war minister. Fevzi Çakmak is very important because he's one of the most senior military officers who is sympathetic to the nationalists but not willing to break with the Sultan yet. Many of the officers who are sympathetic to Mustafa Kemal Atatürk and to the Soviet Congress are not willing to break with Fevzi Çakmak yet. So in a way he stands as a factor that dampens the enthusiasm and the willingness of nationalist military forces in Anatolia to break ranks with Istanbul Constantinople. The members of the parliament also formed themselves in a party called the Felahi-i Vatan Ittifaki, Alliance for the Well-being of the Fatherland, instead of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk Society for the Defense of National Rights. What is worse, Fevzi Çakmak asks his men İnönü to go back to Istanbul Constantinople to work with him, and he does so. Indeed, many nationalists leave Ankara, raising the very real risk that the nationalists of Ankara, led by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, will be isolated and forced to play a secondary role to the Ottoman Parliament. In another name, we have the forming of two different nationalist centers, always a threat to the nationalist movement. One situated in Istanbul, Constantinople, around the Ottoman Parliament, and another one in Ankara, around Mustafa Kemal Atatürk and the Representative Committee. If this continued, it will make it very hard to organize resistance. Between 11th and 12th February 1920, we have the formation of the Communist Party of Azerbaijan, which is the start of the process of the Bolshevikization of the Azerbaijani Republic. On 12th February 1920, the Ottoman Parliament passes the National Pact, the Misak-i Milli. Now, in England, the London Conference opens its work on the question of the Ottoman Peace Treaty. This is among the Entente powers, and the goal is to decide the terms of the final peace treaty with the Ottoman Empire. On the 15th February 1920, Zarushast and Ardahan, Muslim insurgents, submit to Armenian rule. This is an important success of the Armenian Republic, as it essentially permits it to come to contact with the Iranian border. Starting on 16th February 1920 and lasting until 16th April 1920, we have the second Anzavur mutiny against the Turkish nationalist movement, as the Circassian Aznavur attacks the nationalist forces at Akbash, and he successfully destroys them. On 7th February 1920, the French at the London Conference note that they intend to return Cilicia to Turkish rule. This is very important. Now, I have two different sources about when the Misak-i Milli was agreed. The other one claims the 17th of February, so either the 12th or the 17th works. Let's talk a bit about the Misak-i Milli, this was largely based on the decisions of the Siva Congress and laid out the defense of the forming national Turkish nation as represented by its elected parliament. So the Ottoman Parliament for the first time expresses itself as an Anatolian Turkish institution protecting the rights of Anatolian Turkish Muslims. Now, this included at the core a refusal to cede any parts of Anatolia to foreign powers, a refusal to grant a privileged status to the minorities, essentially maintain the kind of capitulations and minority rights that existed during the Hamidian period, a demand for plebiscites to be conducted at the Han and Kars, Western Thrace and the Arab lands of the Ottoman Empire, and whether those areas want to remain as parts of the Ottoman Empire or live. To be frank, they expected that the Arabs will not want to be part of the Ottoman Empire, but they did look forward to Ardahan, Kars and Western Thrace deciding to become part. And what makes this special is that for the first time the word Turkey was used instead of the Ottoman Empire by an official Ottoman institution. Between 21st and 25th February 1920, the Armenians and Georgians addressed the London Conference, trying to push for their issues and trying to ask the conference to arbitrate over the Lori issue. On 22nd February 1920, we have the Khan-Kent incident in Karabakh, again considering Armenians there versus the Azerbaijani Republic. On 26 February 1920, Mustafa Kemal Pasha denounces the Karakol Society and its attempts to negotiate with the Soviet Russia, the so-called Shalva-Eliav-Karakol talks. But he does indicate his willingness for further cooperation with the Soviets as long as he is the one who controls it. In general, Mustafa Kemal Pasha has been long trying to force the Karakol Society to obey the orders of the Representative Committee in Ankara. This had followed an aerial clash in January over the decision of the Karakol Society to surrender guerrilla leader Yahya Kaptan, active in the Izmit Nicomedia region against Ottoman Greek bands, to the Ottoman government. On 27 February 1920, Armenian Commission of London Conference gives its report. This report is not very supportive of Armenian expansion into Cilicia. On 20th February 1920, the 8th Assembly of the sharply divided Karabakh Armenians, at the behest of the Azeri government representative Governor General Sultan of Mis. There were two assemblies, one that accepted incorporation in Azerbaijan and one that rejected it. So the Armenian Karabakhs are actually divided about what their position is going to be. On 29 February 1920, Lieutenant General Leonidas Paraskevopoulos at the Greek General Headquarters arrive at Smyrna, Izmir. The field army is put under his command and dissolved as a command unit. So all of the corps and units of the field army of Asia Minor are now directly commanded by general headquarters of the Greek army. All Greek citizens of the 1910-1914 conscription classes that live in the occupation zone that had escaped service in 1917-1920 are now conscripted. Furthermore, Ottoman Greeks who were not Greek citizens were encouraged to volunteer to the Greek army. This, of course, is an act of treason under Ottoman rule. Law. Paraskevopoulos started lobbying very hard at Venizelos to secure reinforcements and freedom of action from General Milne for the Greek army. He claimed to be facing 30,000 Turks in 3 divisions with 120 guns and 60 artillery pieces. This number is inflated. But Venizelos was focused on a potential dispatch of troops to Eastern Thrace and was not willing to dispatch extra troops right now to Asia Minor. Between the 1st and 8th of March of 1920, Greek forces made up by the 2nd Division and Smyrna Division complete the clearing of the Bozdak Massif from nationalist forces. This permits them to secure the area around Izmir Smyrna. Their main force were the units of Circassian at Hem, Cherkess at Hem, and of a Major Arif. On 3rd March 1920, Ali Riza Pasha resigns as Grand Vizier in reaction to continued Allied pressure on him to impose the Milne Nile on the Turkish nationalists. After mobilization by nationalists, the Sultan appoints Salih Hulusi Pasha as Grand Vizier. He is the one who, as Navy Minister, had agreed to the Amasya Protocol with the nationalists earlier on. Between 5th and 10th March 1920, the Land Conference begins considering the occupation of Istanbul-Constantinople as a way to impose a break between the Ottoman government and the nationalist movement in Anatolia. The final decision is made by overriding Church's opposition and with a promise of a Greek army by Venizelos that can be used to put down the nationalist resistance in Anatolia. The Italians notify Rauf Orbay of the decision, who then notifies Mustafa Kemal Pasha. Kemal Pasha is also probably notified by French officers that the occupation will happen. So the nationalists are already aware what is coming. On 7th March 1920, UK forces in Batum impound the 2 airplanes Armenians bought from the Republic from France. These were only released in June 1920, so the British are actually prohibiting the Armenians from getting the weapons that they are paying very hard to get. Continue the schizophrenic policy of support and not support. On 9th March 1920, Sergei Kiov orders the initiation of the operation to lead to a Soviet Azerbaijan. On 11th and 12th March 1920, there are reports of Azeri forces leaving Baku for Karabakh in an attempt of the Republic of Azerbaijan to impose its will on the Armenians there. On 14th March 1920, the Childer Muslim insurgents at Kars submit to Armenian rule. So the Armenians have now imposed their will on the Zangezur Muslims and Kars Muslims. But at the same time, they are still not able to control the situation in Lori and the situation in other areas. Meanwhile, the Azeris are trying to cut a deal with half of the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh and are fighting the other half. The ferocity of the suppression of the insurrection creates a bad image of Armenia in London and leads to a fallout between the Western Armenian politicians and the representatives of the Armenian Republic. Let's be frank, the Armenian army commits ethnic cleansing and acts of massacre. And this is seen very bad by the Western Armenians like Boghos Nubar, who feel that this undermines Armenian rights. On 15th March 1920, Venizelos gains permission from Milne for deeper Greek operations beyond the demarcation line. On 16th March 1920, we have the start of the formal Allied occupation of Istanbul, Constantinople. Until then, there were Allied forces present in Istanbul, Constantinople, but the Ottoman government was operating. The war ministry was operating and so on. The occupation operation resulted in the death of 5 Ottoman soldiers. Some officers like Kamelatin Sami and parliamentarians like Speaker of the Parliament Celaleddin Arif were able to escape to Ankara before the occupation, but many were arrested. 18 important nationalists were arrested and sent to Malta, including Ottoman members of parliament Rauf Orbay, Kara Vasif, also a member of parliament and Karakol leader, the ex-war minister Cemar Mersinli Pasha, the ex-war minister and ex-chief of general staff Cevat Çobanli Pasha, and many journalists. The nationalist movement in Istanbul is decapitated, leaving just one center of nationalist power, Ankara. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk will not have to deal anymore with the second nationalist center. From now on, there will be one unified voice. So in a way, the occupation of Istanbul is a boon and a gift to Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, as it takes out the potential competition with the Istanbul nationalists for control of the situation. In retaliation to the arrest and deportation of the 18 nationalists to Malta, he orders the arrest of British officers within the area of control of Ankara. On 18th March 1920, we have the last meeting of the Ottoman Parliament, which protests the occupation and then decides to adjourn indefinitely. On 19th March 1920, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk orders elections for a new assembly to convene outside of Istanbul, Constantinople, while the US Senate in America rejects the Versailles Treaty for a second time. Between 18th and 26th March 1920, the Armenian forces retake Akulis in the Kars and the Han region. On 20th March 1920, Colonel Ismet İnönü escapes from Istanbul to Ankara. Other nationalists who escaped to Ankara were Halide Edip Adivar and a big group under Mazhar Bufit Kansu, who were helped by the French to escape to Ankara via Syria and Cilicia. General Gouraud, the High Commissioner of the French in Syria, wants to use them to try and see what options for negotiation existed with Ankara. So as early as March 1920, the French are already looking for an opportunity to make peace with the Turkish nationalists. In Izmir, Smyrna, the General Military Command of Smyrna has been created and tasked with controlling the rear areas of the military effort. Greek Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos notes to Paraskevopoulos that the 6 divisions in Asia Minor are too much and should be decreased further. Paraskevopoulos points out that he only has really 5 divisions, and as time passes and the nationalists gain power, he will need more. He is willing to sacrifice 6,000 men to be sent to Macedonia to participate in potential operations in Thrace as a stopgap measure, but he tells Venizelos, I need men. On 22nd March 1920, once again Venizelos asks for 1 division to be sent from Asia Minor to Thrace and suggests that Paraskevopoulos could decrease the power of 2 divisions by taking 1/4 of their manpower and sending it to Thrace. Paraskevopoulos says no. On 23rd March 1920, we have the onset of the insurrection of the Armenians of Karabakh against Azerbaijan. General Milne finally provides officially freedom to Greek troops to counterattack deeper into Anatolia, as long as they retreat to the demarcation line when they're done with their operations. Between 23 and 26 March 1920, we have the battle and sack of Shushi by Azeri forces that defeated Armenian rebels. On 29th March 1920, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk urges Karabekir to occupy Kars and Ardahan. Meanwhile, he is still facing the attempts of War Minister Fevzi Çakmak and Grand Vizier Halushi Pasha to keep the army loyal to the Sultan. The key officer here was Colonel Fahrettin Altay, the commander of the 12th Corps at Konya Iconium, who seemed to defer to the higher seniority of Esmi Çakmak. Worried about a potential defection by his corps to the Sultanic government, Mustafa Kemal Pasha is prepared to send Refet Bele to persuade him to choose Ankara and, if need, to arrest him. Greek losses in the period from February to May 1920 are amounted to 75 killed in action, 126 wounded in action. In the end of March 1920, the forces of the Greek army in Asia Minor amounted to 3,248 officers, 91,063 enlisted men, 28,804 pack animals, 3,042 horse-drawn carriages, and 937 motor vehicles. The Greek army claimed to face about 60,000 regular and irregular Turkish troops in the region between the Milne Line and Eskişehir. Immediately in front of the Greek forces were the demobilized 57th, 23rd and 61st divisions, with each about 2,000 to 3,000 men, and considerable Kuvayi melee forces. So that's where we are. Thanks to Allied decision to occupy Istanbul, Constantinople, the potential of the nationalist movement to be divided in two different centers is averted. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk seems poised to be the leader and the voice of a unified nationalist movement. The closing of the occupation of Istanbul weakens the legitimacy of the Ottoman government. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos is preparing for a major move into Thrace, continuously demanding that forces be diverted from Asia Minor to Thrace. While Lieutenant General Paraskevopoulos says that it is in Asia Minor that is important and forces should be sent there so he can take major operations to dissolve the growing nationalist strength. My sources for this episode are Andrew Mango, Atatürk, the concise history of the campaign in Asia Minor by the Greek General Staff, Fahri Belen, Turk Kurtuluş Savaşı. I also looked at the Richard Hovhannisyan, The Republic of Armenia, the 4-volume work, and also Stefan τα κείμενα του Ελευθερίου Βενιζέλου, The Documents of Eleftherios Venizelos, Volume 3. I also took a look at the Attaché İstiklal Harbi serisi, the second book on the Bati Cephesi on the Western Front. Thank you all for watching. Keep safe, do distance socializing, and we'll all get through this. There have been worse times, and there will be better times. And I'll see you now again with an episode in April, May, in June. So, good luck, keep safe, and I'll see you later.